Inside what's inside my bones.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Cranio Family Vlogs. Today we are talking a little bit more about craniosynostosis. We are digging into the different types of procedures. We're going to focus a little bit more on specifically what we've experienced with Zoe, and also talk about some of the other major procedures that a lot of cranio parents will face.
So our daughter Zoe's had quite a few surgeries in her 5 years of life. Some of those have been non-cranio surgeries. They're related to things that are not involving her skull, but the majority of them have been. The very first experience we had as parents of a child with craniosynostosis was going through a procedure that's called a CVR. Now CVR stands for cranial vault remodeling. We've also seen it called cranial vault reconstruction. The particular procedure that our daughter had at her very first surgery was a posterior CVR. This is where they take the back of the skull off of the brain. They make hundreds of thousands of microcuts into the skull to cause it to become more flexible. Then the plastic surgeon and the neurosurgeon work together to place that piece of skull back onto the brain, and they close the child up. This procedure is done most often when a child has some of the frontal sutures that are closed. It is also done to allow the brain to grow and develop as the child grows and develops without being hindered by those closed sutures. It was absolutely terrifying and gut-wrenching for that to be the very first procedure that we had to go through. We had a lot of conversations. We didn't sleep well for the days that led up to it, and I didn't sleep well for the days that followed, even though I was being told to often. But that was our introduction into craniosurgeries for our daughter.
And Zoe was 8 months old at that time, and I would say the vast majority of cases that I've heard about are under a year old. So they're babies, they're infants that go through this. The brain grows rapidly within the first 2 years of life, and this is very strongly seen with cranio kids, that when you see there's something going on, usually there's a procedure that needs to be done within the first year. Another cranio-related procedure that we've experienced is the placement and removal of distractors, which we're going to cover in a few more days in more depth. But basically, it's placement of an expander with a screw attached onto those fused sutures so that it allows for a gradual spacing of the skull over a longer period of time from home. And then we return after that spacing has occurred, and then they remove the extenders and the screws. So it's a two-part procedure for the distractors.
The last procedure that we're going to talk about today is a very common dual procedure that a lot of children with craniosynostosis go through. It is the anterior CVR as well as the FOA. FOA stands for forward orbital advancement. So much like the posterior CVR, the anterior CVR involves the removal of a portion of the skull, hundreds of thousands of microcuts being made into the bone, and the skull being placed back on top of the brain. Forward orbital advancement means that what they are actually doing is they are taking apart the structure of the eye socket and orbit. They are restructuring it. They sometimes will put in a bone graft to create a brow, because most children with bicoronal craniosynostosis do not have a brow line, and they allow more space behind the eyes and the front of the skull for the brain to continue to grow and develop.
And lastly, a final procedure that many of our friends have experienced, although we haven't with Zoe, is an endoscopic surgery. And that is not nearly as invasive as a CVR procedure, and so it is preferred if at all possible. It's generally done with younger children under 6 months.
There's also a very long list of other procedures that are used in the craniosynostosis world that you can find on our blog. Our daughter hasn't gone through them yet, so we really don't want to speak to them, but we have researched some of them and placed a lot of the descriptors of what happens and why it's done on our website. So just like that, in about 10 minutes or so, you've learned about 3 of the procedures that our daughter has gone through. There's the posterior CVR, the anterior CVR, the FOA, and the distractors that were placed. You've also learned a little bit about endoscopic surgery, but you can read a lot more about that on our website. Thank you so much for hanging in there, and we'll see you on the other side.